Chapter 21. The world did not heal entirely, but as happy endings go, it was as close to a fairy tale ending as one could ask for. Once the necromancer lost his power, the first thing that people noticed was that the sun came back. People were very cautious at first, given Jarvie's past tricks, but this time the sun came back everywhere, not just over the town. For a brief period of time, the zombies attacked each other. The force that had kept the bio-zombies, the snarks, and the undead zombies from attacking each other went away. Needless to say, the bio-zombies came out ahead on that one, but as soon as the first sunrise after the sun returned happened, all of the bio-zombies, snarks, mecha-zombies, and fire-zombies reverted back into normal people. After the sun went down, the undead zombies began to shamble back toward their graves and just dump themselves inside. In a few cases, in which Jarvie had moved them far away from their graves, they marched for days across the country. People reported shambling cases even 2 weeks later. The zombie soldiers were finally able to find the peace that they had always wanted. They, too, returned to their original hometowns. They didn't go back to their old graves, but dug new ones next to their families. They seemed to have a supernatural affinity for finding them. A few cautiously answered questions for people about what had happened with Jarvie. They didn't answer any kind of questions about the afterlife, except that there was one. There were even reports of a few of them staying around for a few days, helping to rebuild the things that they'd helped to destroy, but this certainly didn't happen near the town. The town itself gave a hero's burial to the four, as they had come to be known. They were buried together in a prominent monument inside of the town. There had been some debate about exactly what to do for the monument, but in the end they had been satisfied with a simple stone monument that said, "They died for the sake of the world," which was as true as anything, really. Mulmo and Marv had both vied for Doc's place after everything was said and done. Mulmo claimed he was the leader who had seen them through the darkness, side by side with Doc. Marv claimed to know Doc personally and took credit for bringing Grenade Man to the town. Mulmo pointed out that Marv was the one who had shot Kevin, and Marv pointed out that Mulmo had been unconscious when they were arguing about whether or not to throw out the children, otherwise he would have joined them. There was a lot of arguing back and forth on both sides, but in the end people got so sick of them, they chose Michelle. The government wasn't what it used to be. Because they had dropped the ball so badly on the zombie situation, people didn't really trust the emergency government committees that kept trying to convince people that they were the ones in charge of rebuilding things. They had a constitutional convention at the town hall, and Michelle led it. She kept things more or less the same, but with a few extra amendments that people liked. No one had seen Grenade Man since his final battle against Jarvie. While people were relieved to see him go, they were also saddened by it. They widely credited him with stopping the necromancer, even though they didn't entirely know how he'd done it. 3 months passed, and Michelle's pregnancy was starting to show. Then one morning, while she was filling out some paperwork to help set up new federal elections, there was a knock at the door. The sun shone through the window. It was very bright and made the desk that Michelle was working on seem larger than it really was. "Come in." She guessed that her secretary must have been at lunch. She had specifically said no visitors. The door opened, and a man with a scruffy beard walked in. He wore a rough work shirt and blue jeans. He carried a duffel bag over his shoulder, like he was some kind of sailor. He looked familiar somehow. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "I just thought I'd say goodbye. I've done what I can to help with the cleanup, but it's time I cashed in my chips and headed for home." It took her a moment to recognize the voice. "Grenade Man?" He laughed and set the duffel bag down in front of him with a heavy thump. "Frank. Call me Frank. I doubt we'll be seeing more of the other guy." "You're not being a superhero anymore?" "I never really was a superhero in the first place. I've got no powers to speak of, and without the madness, the magic items aren't as effective. It's a long story, but it's time I went home. I do have one more issue to take care of, though. Do you have any idea where Jarvie might be?" "He's still alive?" "He is. This isn't done between us. Just because he'd had his powers removed doesn't mean that he has died or anything. Given your position, I had hoped you might have some intelligence reports." Michelle nodded and reached into her desk, extracting a file. "Yeah, there are rumors of a skeleton up by Arlington National Cemetery. Given everything that's happened, you can imagine we don't have time to check up on every lead. We do what we can, though. We've actually got people trying to learn magic. Serious magic. Hopefully this won't happen again." She handed the file to Frank. Thanks, I appreciate it. He took the file and slowly stood. He hefted the bag over his shoulder. She couldn't help but ask, "So, you're not from this world?" He shook his head. "What is your world like?" "Pretty much like this one, really. But the good is a lot more good, the bad is a lot worse. Except Jarvey. He's a real piece of work, that one is. There are superheroes there, real ones, not like me." Michelle looked down at her desk. "You seem pretty superheroic to me." He laughed. "Well, thanks, I appreciate it, I guess. But I'm not. I just do what I can with what I have." "Isn't that what a hero really is?" she asked. "I suppose it is." He opened the door and waved as he walked out. "I suppose it is." He closed the door behind him, leaving her wondering if she should have asked him to stay. It was a quiet morning at Arlington National Cemetery. Jarvey worked as hard as he could. He had half expected his body to be given back when everything else was undone, but no, he was still a lich. He found that he was bound to the scepter and cloak that Oberon had given him. It hurt to be more than 10 feet away from them, and he had to wear them for at least an hour a day or he would be in terrible pain. He'd tried to simply abandon them once, but after the 3rd day the pain was almost as bad as what Oberon had done to him the first time. So he wore them when he had to, but most of the time he was just an animated skeleton. His bones had taken on a cold gray hue, which contrasted rather oddly with the green of the grass that was just budding up through the ground. He felt out of place. Jarvey knew that he was a monster, but no one else needed to know it. Every once in a while people came to the cemetery and saw him working there. Most people avoided him. They had more experience with the dead in their lifetimes than they would ever care to repeat. He left them alone, and they left him alone. But he did not forgive them for what he knew they thought of him. Jarvey would be named a monster throughout history. They would not see things from his perspective. They would consider him worse than any dictator who had ever lived. When it came to sheer body count, he beat any of them hands down, even Stalin. But it wasn't fair. The memory of his deeds would outlast even his own bones before they turned to dust. So, if they were to see him as a monster, then he would become the monster they feared. The world was in a delicate enough state as it was. One more push would be enough to send it over the edge. He knew the last seed was there in the cemetery. He'd been working at it, trying to pry it loose from whatever power held it locked. Every morning he came out again and worked almost all day, only taking time to wear his robe and scepter for a few minutes just before sunrise. And he nearly had it. Bit by bit, he had chipped away at the layers of power between himself and the seed. He could feel it, pulsing, throbbing beneath the soil. He was relentless, and now for the first time since he had become a lich, he had an intense thirst for power. He worked ever harder, pouring his soul and mind into it with absolute focus. He was there. He reached for it with his mind, touching it, tasting it, trying to draw upon it. Almost there. And then he heard the voice. "Stop, Jarvey." Jarvey couldn't believe it. He knew who it was, but Jarvey ignored him and reached for the power. He found it strangely absent. He opened his eyes and returned to the world of the living. Jarvey was surprised to see a scruffy bum in front of him instead of the lunatic superhero that he had fought several months before. He held some kind of amulet in his hand, like it was a holy symbol. It was on a gold chain with a white pearl center. He could tell that this was the source of his pain. The object Grenade Man was holding was the source of Grenade Man's ability to slip through Jarvey's anima tentacles like they weren't even there. "What do you want?" he asked Grenade Man. "It's time to end it, Jarvey. Time for death and time for peace." He held the talisman forward. Jarvey laughed. "That's it, huh? You think you can just kill me that easily? I've already died at least twice." Frank didn't answer and just moved closer. The closer he came, the weaker Jarvey felt. A strange white light came from the amulet, and he began to feel like the world was ending. He fought it. Oh, how he fought it! But it was too powerful. It sapped his strength and even his will to fight. In a last-ditch effort at cleverness, it faded. He stopped thinking. He stopped being. He waited, and eventually the world grew back. Maybe, just maybe, if he could do it just right. For a long time there was only blackness. The light slowly drained his essence, but after an eternity, it stopped. He could sense something different, and that was all he needed. He reached out with his mind and grabbed the seed beneath the earth. Instantly, power seeped into his limbs, his bones reanimated, and he grabbed the talisman that Frank had set at his feet. He sent out tentacles of anima, getting ready to crush the insolent fool. He laughed as he caught Frank entirely by surprise. But just as quickly, there was yet another bright white light. Order had returned. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair. Jarvie cursed and waited for the inevitable assault, but it didn't come. Instead, Order spoke to him, appearing as a kindly woman with red hair and blue eyes. Apparently, holding the talisman gave Order the power to override his senses like Chaos did before. "Hello, Jarvie," Order said. "I have been watching you. You have done a very good job fighting my recruit. I noticed that Chaos has fought you. Have you considered working for me?" Jarvie was astonished. Order was offering him a job. "What would you want me to do?" "Oh, be yourself, really. You'd be surprised how much power and utility a necromancer can bring to one cause. This is only a minor battle between my brother and I." She laughed warmly. "I could use your services." Frank couldn't believe what he was seeing. He said, "Morgan, what are you doing?" She turned around, red flame coming from her eyes that made her hair seem pale. "How many times do I have to tell you, Frank, I am not Morgan Le Fay. I am not your friend. I take her appearance when it suits me. She warned you, and I warned you." Her face melted, and instead an old woman appeared in a gray cloak with a long golden staff. "Merlin or Morgan, it is an old game we play. Your petty concepts of good or evil are so beneath us it is sickening. Now leave." "What? What about—" "Our bargain? I don't care what Oberon said. I told you about the legalities of a case as a backup, in case things went wrong. Our deal was for you to shield their lives. You might have saved lives here, but I don't care about that. I care about results. And you came far too close to failure. Our bargain is null and void." Frank looked shocked. He looked angry and about to act, but stopped. What are you going to do, Frank? Attack me? Go ahead. Lob a grenade at me and see what happens." Jarvie was definitely enjoying this. Order turned back to Jarvie and asked, "Ready?" Jarvie thought of something taunting to say to Frank. He wanted to lord this over him and save him. A part of him wondered at working for the sibling when the first master had betrayed him. But the truth was, he would probably gain more power. He had nothing to lose here. Anything he said to Frank at this point would just sound stupid. Jarvie shook his head. "Excellent. Ta-ta, Frank." And with that, they were both gone. Frank walked back toward the town. Just how was he supposed to get home now? Grenade Man could probably make a device to do it, though he was more of a chemist and not a quantum physicist. But his insight into the mad sciences was limited by his insanity, and he wasn't going down that road again just to get home. This wasn't a bad world, really. It might be interesting to help rebuild it. Oh, who was he kidding? He missed his family. He missed the way his world was. And while adventure was all well and good, this was not a life he would have voluntarily chose. He had more or less resigned himself to being stuck here, when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Frank?" Morgan said. Frank whirled around, his hand on an explosive grenade. He threw it at Morgan, and then readied another. Morgan laughed and turned it into a fruit bowl. She laughed and turned into Merlin. "Is this form more suitable to you?" Frank didn't even bother to answer and picked up another grenade to throw at Chaos. Chaos snorted with laughter, and then turned it into a Pomeranian. Then he turned the fruit bowl back into a grenade and watched the Pomeranian blow to bits. Frank. I don't think you understand. I'm not asking you to work with me. I'm just messing with your head. See, this is all a part of one long gambit my brother and I have had against each other for quite some time now. I don't need you to work for me. I just need you to exist, to be you." Frank tossed another grenade. Chaos made it disappear, and thought a moment. "Well, there is one thing, though. Something missing." "Ah, yes." Frank lurched in pain and got a wild look in his eyes.
"Begone, foul fiend, for good shall ever triumph over evil."
Chaos laughed.
"That's more like it. Welcome to the big board, Grenade Man."
And with that, Grenade Man was consigned to the darkness between worlds once again.